Planetary nebula is a terrible name because it's really confusing. These nebulae don't actually have anything to do with planets, other than that when early astronomers looked at them using little dinky telescopes like the ones I've got back here. I love my telescopes. And yes, I know this one is missing the eyepiece right now, but I love them, but they're tiny. So when you look at a planetary nebula through them, they don't, you can't really see the same details that we're used to seeing when we look at them through Hubble or other pretty impressive telescopes of today. So the astronomers, when they found them, they just said, okay, it's a nebula. So nebula is Latin for cloud. So any sort of fuzzy thing that we don't really or didn't really know what it was, it's just sort of this fuzzy thing, we called it a nebula. It looks like a little fuzzy cloud, right? And then it was called planetary because it kind of looked like Uranus, kind of looked like planets through a telescope, sort of round, and the early ones being found had that kind of greenish blue, really pretty. They looked like planets. They weren't planets, so we called them planetary nebulae. Now, what they actually they are the leftovers of low mass stars. So when low mass stars die, they push off, or low mass stars like the sun. We think what's going to happen with red dwarfs is a little bit different. We'll talk about that in a different video. But in stars like the sun, they push their outer layers and they drop those off into space. So those beautiful rings of colors that we're seeing are those outside layers of the star drifting off into space. So a better name, I don't know, what do you think would be I've heard stellar nebula, I've heard remnant nebula, but let me know if you think there would be a better name for it. The tricky thing is that we've had this name for generations and generations, so it's kind of stuck, and changing names can be really tricky, even when we learn that something isn't really that, right? A neutron star is not really a star. A planetary nebula is not really planetary. A black hole is not really a hole. But how do we start using new names to describe these things?